How much does a human life mean to you? He is incredible. He likes fun. He's sensitive. He's resilient. He's smart. He's one of the most amazing people you will ever meet. His story is crazy. His life has been strange. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. So nice to get your feedback on the last episode. Thank you very much. The crazy doctor death in Texas. Thanks if you got in touch. Now, no shout outs this episode. And that's because I'm saving them for something else. I'm saving them for something special. Something else that I'm going to be doing. I'm not trying to do that annoying thing that people do where they go, oh, I'm leading up to something that I'm not going to tell you about just now. But I'm actually just not going to really mention what it is. But fear not, if you have asked me for a shout out, it is on its way, just not in this episode. So, on with the story, this short stories episode. I discovered this one a while ago and I just couldn't stop thinking about the story. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say about it. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. So we start in Liberia. Liberia is on the west coast of Africa, and this is the early 2000s. Now, it was a time when Liberia was facing a devastating civil war. The death toll was huge. The destruction to Liberia was horrendous. And right in the middle of all of this, there was a family and there was a young boy named Moses. So Moses had been born into conflict, gunfire. This was what Moses knew from baby years upwards. Now, his father felt strongly that he wanted his family out of Liberia, and take them out of Liberia is exactly what he did. They found a refugee camp that they could go to get away from the fighting. Now, like I said, Liberia is in the west coast of Africa, and in that country, men are allowed to have up to 4 wives at a time. Now, I'm not even going to get started on that subject because, quite frankly, that's a whole other episode, and I will do that in the future. I find it so interesting. I just find it so fascinating. I can never say the word polygamy, something like this, polygamy, Paula, something, I don't know. I can never quite say it properly, but the concept of it is just fascinating. So I will do that in the future. Okay, so you can have up to 4 wives in Liberia. And this man, he had 3. And so in the middle of this civil war in his country, he has 3 wives. He has many kids. Moses being the youngest. And it's just too much. It was tough. It was a struggle. They weren't in their own country. They were hiding out as refugees, trying to raise kids. So Moses' mother and father, they make a decision, which I can only assume must be the most heartbreaking decision to have to make. They decide that they just can't have all of these kids, and that the one they need to get rid of is Moses. And so they send him to an orphanage. Now it's a Christian-run orphanage filled with hundreds of kids just waiting, just every kid waiting for someone to come along, get them out of there, a family who might come along and might take them away. So Moses' dad brings him to that orphanage and he explains why we're here is I have 3 wives. I have many children. And I need this one off my hands. I need him taken into an orphanage. It's too much for me. Okay, mate. Well, again, I know it's your culture, but there's still always choice involved. And nobody was making you have 3 wives and have all these kids. Again, that's a story for another episode. So the Christian organisation, they take Moses in happily. The organisation it's kind of run through donations that they get and through a little bit of funding, but it's quite a poor organisation. I mean poor in the sense of money poor. I think they do their bit. They do their absolute best. The kids are fed well. They're dressed. They can feel safe in this particular place. They're looked after. And they're just waiting for these kids to be taken out of the orphanage. It doesn't exist anymore, sadly, this one that Moses went to. But there's, in a documentary that I watched, there's the most amazing moment where a guy who used to, I think he was the manager, I think he was in charge of accepting new kids into it. He brings out a book, right? And this book is amazing. It's basically a notepad. And the notepad it's like an A4 sheet of paper at the front, right? And written on this notepad is the name of every child who's in the orphanage. So there's loads and loads of pages, right? It goes on for ages and ages and ages. Now, next to the kids who have been taken out of the orphanage, there's a tiny little dash, and all that's written next to it is the country that they went to. So it'll say things like Grace Jones dash Europe, Samantha Smith dash UK, Bobby Sky dash Finland. And that's what that whole notebook just looks like. There's no details written down there about who took them. It's just where they went, just the country that they went to. And right next to Moses' name, it says dash Canada. Moses had indeed been picked from the hundreds of children in that orphanage by a Canadian couple. A couple named Ian and Carol Johnson, who lived in Castleguard, Canada. Now, they went through all the right steps to adopt Moses. Ian had gone to the place where this orphanage was a month before the adoption happened. He'd spent time there. He'd met lots of kids, and he'd decided that Moses was the child that he wanted to bring back to Canada. So what was Ian and Carol, what was their setup? Well, they had one child biologically who was aged 12, and they had a baby who they had also adopted from another African country years before. So now Moses was about 4, going on the age of 5, and he was going to be brought into the Johnson family. Ian and Carol Johnson were Canada born, lived in Canada all their lives, and they wanted a big family. Having only ever had one biological child of their own, they wanted to adopt, they wanted to help other children. And so Moses is successfully taken by Ian from the orphanage and taken to Canada. So Moses quickly settles in with his new family. And the Johnsons, they're like sending pictures back to the orphanage, which show Moses having a wonderful time. You know, he's like out in the snow, he's having a brilliant time, he's at parties, he's just, you know, he's this amazing 4-year-old going around just having lots of fun, and it's all great. These pictures are actually deceptive because Ian and Carol, they start to become concerned that actually Moses is displaying some violent behaviours. They say he is aggressive. They say that they fear for the other 2 children in the family around Moses. Carol Johnson says that one day Moses tries to drown another child in a swimming pool. Ian and Carol will say that Moses confesses to them that back in Liberia he had killed another child through strangulation. The Johnsons, Ian and Carol, become so concerned about Moses that they put a bell on his bedroom door so that they can hear when he's up at night. They say he plays with knives and that he is threatening towards the family. So what do they do with this? Well, they go to the adoption agency who helped arrange the adoption. They say, we are scared, we're having real issues, and we think he's going to present us problems in the future. So the agency say, okay, right, well, we'll tell you what we'll do. We'll send him to a child psychologist and we'll just check all of these things out. So the date is arranged, and Moses and his adoptive mum Carol, they go to the child psychologist appointment. In that appointment, the child psychologist does her absolute best to assess Moses. So, she asks Moses if he did actually kill someone back in Liberia. He has no knowledge of what the psychologist is talking about. So the psychologist says, oh, do you know how to choke someone to death? And he looks confused. He's asked, can you mime for us? Can you show us? How might you choke someone? Can we all bear in mind Moses at this point isn't even 5 years old? So he's asked, can you mime? Can you show us how to strangle someone, how to choke someone to death? And he has no idea. So his adoptive mother, Carol, stands up in this meeting. Oh my God, get this. She puts her own hands around her neck and she begins to demonstrate choking. And she says to Moses, this is what you do to choke someone. And this 4-year-old is looking at her like, what the fuck? What's going on here? Like, what's actually happening? So the child psychologist continues to talk to Moses about everything, about anything. And through all of those tests that children go through when they're seeing a child psychologist, when there's strange behaviour being displayed, the psychologist can't really find anything too alarming with Moses. She says, I see no destructive behaviours, and I see no evidence that he's potentially committed violent acts. She says, yes, it is possible that, having been born into a country at war, there's a small element of PTSD running through Moses, but I don't think it's anything on the level that you are trying to say that it is. The child psychologist concludes this. She says, I don't think the problem lives with Moses. I think the problem lives with those who are caring for Moses. It seems like they might be implanting false memories. She's not fucking about, this child psychologist. She's not messing about here. After that meeting with Moses and adoptive mother Carol, she goes to the rest of her department and she takes it higher and says, there is a real concern here. She says, I think there's emotional abuse happening. And I think Moses needs taken out of this situation. She says, I think the mother is imagining things that are just not happening because I cannot see any of those things. When the family are told that Moses might potentially be suffering from PTSD, they decide they just don't have the strength or the energy to deal with that. So Carol goes to another adoption agency, one that they're not connected to, one that she's never been connected to. And she says, look, here's the situation. I've adopted this child from Liberia. He's displaying all sorts of strange behaviour. I'm worried for my family and I don't know what to do in this situation. And the woman who interviews Carol, she realises very quickly that this adoption is not going to hold. That's the term that she uses. This adoption is not going to hold. But it's at this point, during this conversation, Carol says something to her that is very alarming. Carol says, I've been looking on the internet. I've been looking around at other families who are struggling with those that they have adopted. And I've considered the possibility that I might need to move Moses on from my family to somewhere else. Carol and Ian had been spending their time on lots of different groups on the internet. They'd found their way into lots of different groups here and there that were all to do with adoption. And they found a group for parents who had adopted but felt that it was a mistake, or that the child they had adopted was just too difficult for them to deal with. And so they chatted to people. Carol says, we found that we were not the only people who had ever adopted and then regretted the decision. And so now the idea of giving Moses up online became a real possibility for Ian and Carol. Now, just to clarify, I'm not talking dark web shit, right? We're not talking dark web. I say dark web, I don't even really know what the dark web is. I'm not talking hidden fucking groups that no one knows about. I'm talking they did a Yahoo search. I mean, first question, who does a fucking Yahoo search? The phrase Google it exists for a reason. And I'm not talking that they went down some shady path of being like, whoa, we're going to find all these hidden groups. No, they just literally did a Yahoo search about adoption groups or adoption gone wrong. And this is where they found this community of people that they could talk to. Now, in that community, they start to seriously consider this is how they will remove Moses from their life. They start to wonder, would it be possible to put 4-year-old Moses online and ask for someone to take him? Don't even get me fucking started. I can't even go. So they put an advert up. They put an advert up that says, we have a 5-year-old who we need adopted. He's from Liberia. He's yours if you want him. I'm sorry. I think at this point, Ian and Carol might potentially be fucking mixing up a child with a fucking sofa or a lamp or a fucking TV. What are you on about? You do not put your fucking child up online. Oh, they use the phrase, so awful, in the advert to get rid of Moses. They use the phrase rehome. Rehome. Is Moses a fucking cat? No, he's a child. Rehome my fucking arse. Oh. The advert, it gets a response. It gets a response from a woman in Texas. This woman's name is Ambrosia Marvin. Great name. Ambrosia. Just makes you think ambrosia cream. She says, yes, I will take Moses. She says, I've raised 2 kids already and I'm looking to raise another. And I will take him. Ian and Carol are thrilled at this. Fucking delighted. Someone is going to take Moses off their hands. And this just breaks my heart. They pack some of Moses' belongings into a small suitcase. And his adoptive dad, Ian, says to him, okay, we're going on a trip. All the while, Moses has no idea why he's going to Texas. And what he doesn't know is that he's going to cross into Texas from Canada. And he's not coming back that night with his family. He's about to be handed over to a complete stranger that his adoptive mom and dad have met on the internet. So they arrive at a hotel just outside of Houston Airport in Texas, and they meet Ambrosia Marvin. Now the deal here is that Ambrosia, who has answered the advert and decided that she wants to take Moses off of the Johnsons' hands, they're going to spend a few days together in this hotel. So in this hotel there's going to be Ambrosia, there's going to be Ian, and there's going to be Moses. And for 3 days they'll spend some time together. They'll get Moses used to the idea that he's not going back with Ian to Canada, that instead he's now going to live with Ambrosia. Now, it never went anywhere near 3 days. Because Ian goes to Ambrosia at one point and he says to her, if you don't take him now, then I'm going to stop this. He says, if you don't take him this second, the deal is off, because I don't know how to deal with this. He says, I can't go back home with Moses. He has to go for my family. But if you don't take him this second, the entire thing is off. And so she does. Ambrosia Marvin, she takes Moses that night and she takes him back to her home. So Ian returns to his family home. And they're back to having just 2 children. No Moses, he's gone. It's discovered very quickly that the Johnson family have got rid of Moses. And they really refuse to talk about this. They say no one will understand our side of the story. No one will believe that this has been incredibly difficult for us. They say there are reports from psychologists who say that he's suffering from PTSD. But what those reports won't tell you is that he is a nightmare. He is a terror. He is so difficult to live with day on day. So now Moses, he starts his new life with Ambrosia Marvin. It takes 3 months, 3 full months, for anything to really happen in the case of Moses. It takes someone from social services to raise the alarm, properly raise the alarm, that Moses is gone, that he no longer lives with Ian and Carol Johnson. And when the alarm is raised, then, yes, action begins to happen. They try to discover, well, where is he? And they go to Ian and Carol. And Ian and Carol will say, well, we gave him to a woman who lives in Texas. And they say, okay, who is the woman? Give us her name. And they say, okay, her name is Ambrosia Marvin. And it's when they do some digging into Ambrosia Marvin that a panic sets in. Ambrosia Marvin had been investigated twice by Child Protection Services. Now, this is annoying. Through legal silencing, I don't really think that's what it's called, but through legal things where you just can't find out the actual details, it's unclear why Ambrosia was investigated twice. It's impossible to know what she was being investigated for, but what's clear is that she was investigated twice. And the outcome of each of those investigations were never concrete. There was never a consequence. Now, for me, there's the old, I don't like to judge from a distance when I don't know the story, but there is the old, there's no smoke without fire. There's something. A woman has been investigated twice by Child Protection Services. I'm going to say massive fucking alarm bells should be ringing. But this is now who Moses is living with. So authorities are stepping in at this point. Because, as much as you'd like to think it's illegal to give your child away online, it's not actually illegal to do that. To rehome, what a terrible fucking phrase, to rehome your child with someone else isn't actually illegal. Now, this might come under one of these things where it's like, in Canada it's not, in America it is, in Europe you can do this, in Australia you can do this. I don't really know, but actually, under Canadian law, Ian and Carol hadn't done anything wrong. Yes, morally they had done something wrong, but legally, no. But what they had done was they had broken one law, which is to move a child from Canada into America who doesn't have the correct documentation. That is law breaking. So, at 5 years old, Moses is taken away from Ambrosia Marvin and he's brought back to Canada. And so for 2 years, Moses spends his time in and out of different orphanages. He goes to a couple of different foster homes, but they're always only short-lived. Until eventually at the age of 7, 2 years after he was given away on the internet, he's adopted by Dave and Kathy Gilbert. So they meet Moses when he's 7 and he's in an orphanage. And they just talk about Moses in the most beautiful way. They say when they met him, they realised that he was smart. He was clever. But what seemed really hard for Moses was to find happiness. He just couldn't find happiness in himself quickly. They would try and make him laugh, and it wouldn't work. They would do everything that they could to try and make Moses happy, and he was so introvert, he was so into himself. Now, Dave and Kathy Gilbert, they had actually adopted 15 kids in their life, and 6 of those kids came from difficult adoptions. Other families who had at some point thought, I've adopted, this child is too difficult, right, get rid of them, move on. But the difference was they were willing to give Moses a go. They were willing to give him the chance that Ian and Carol were not willing to give him. They say a really interesting thing here, actually, and I do think this is probably the crux of the story. I think it's probably the heart of the story. They say it's so important, if you're going to adopt a child, you have to instill in that child that you're going to be there for the long term. You're going to be there for the future. You have to instill that belief in them, and they had to work hard with Moses to do this. The idea that I'm not going anywhere and you're not going anywhere. And they say with Moses that was probably their biggest challenge. I mean, fuck's sake, by 7, he'd had his family in Liberia who put him into an orphanage. He was taken to Canada, and then he was given up and sent to Texas. So by age 7, this boy had just been bounced around from fucking home to home. Moses is now 13 years old, and he is still living with the Gilbert family. And he is surrounded by his brothers and sisters and all the loving family members. Moses still remembers the Johnson family, and he remembers vividly the night that he was taken away. And he just says, I was so confused, I had no idea what was happening. Now, the whole case of Moses being taken away one night by being put up on the internet, it just created so much discussion, and good discussion, so much paperwork, and it became a real legal issue about Where and when in the fucking world is it okay to go on a Yahoo group online and just get rid of your child? And so what happened was authorities started to close down these groups. They started to actually target these groups and then shut them down. Now, the sort of slight problem with that is what actually then happens is you then make these groups go underground. I'm not saying you should have these groups at all, of course not. But what's difficult is that they then just find another way to exist. But it was the Moses conversation that started people actually looking at it and going, no, we need to shut down these groups that are trying to sell children or trying to, move children from one house to another without any authorities being involved in it. But what do we need to know? Well, we need to know that Moses is happy. He is thriving as a 13-year-old boy living in America. Moses is described by his mother, Kathy, as incredible, fun, sensitive, resilient, smart. She says he's one of the most amazing people you will ever meet. Yes, his story is crazy, and yes, his life has been strange. But she also says this, and this is how I would like to end the story. She says, if we're not trying to give kids who need it a family, then who are we as human beings? And so ends the story. Alright then, well, I hope you enjoyed the story of Moses. I did. I think it's a real awakening for me, because I just didn't know that happened. It's like, it's the difference between going like, yeah, we all know and we don't want to think about, and I do not ever want to think about it, about like, what happens in the dark web with selling children and, all that sex trafficking and all that shit. But just feel this story, I was like, actually just at the point where you go, I don't want this child anymore. And I'll just put them on the internet. Just find it so insane. Anyway, that's it for this short stories episode. If you want to get in touch, then join the Facebook group. It's amazing. It's so incredible. There was the most amazing discussion this week. I put up something that was like, what's really annoying phrases? I talked about someone, oh God, there's a guy in my work who says to me all the time, he says, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I want to punch him in the face all the time because he says it to me all day long. And I'm like, it's so boring. So I started a conversation on the Facebook group about this. And yeah, I think there's been about 200 comments about this so far. Just people going, this phrase I hate. But also you'll just find lots of funny stuff, lots of like really silly stuff, and also people just sending stories to the group or discussing things that we talk about in an episode. So please join the Facebook group. There's also Twitter, there's Instagram. You can get me in all these places. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story, and until the next episode, okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. would imagine from the look on his face. Let's get it on. Let's do it. Let's get it over. Let's get it on. Let's do it. Let's get it over.